in the original location. I probably move more than any other music YouTuber you've ever known, but there is good reason for it. I mean, each time has had a particular specific reason related to coronavirus, which is why I've moved. And this most recent example of that was so that I could help with my nephew and homeschooling and stuff. So I went back to my sister's, and that's why the location looked different for the past month or so in videos. But we are back here. Who knows what the future holds? I mean, in about 3 weeks, I could be back. I don't even know at this stage. Who knows? Mate, no one can predict anything. Enough of that though. Here we are with the new Black Dresses album. They are a duo who have been around for a few years at this stage with a pretty prolific output, I must say. Whether they're doing their own solo stuff as Rook and Devi, they're dropping pretty consistently in that capacity, or it's in their duo as Black Dresses, and they have been consistent as hell with their releases. I'll be honest, I haven't heard every single one because I didn't get off to the best start with them, with the album Waste Isolation. Really could not stand that, really irritated my ears. Not an album I enjoyed at all, not a particularly positive take there. I understand that, but I'm just speaking how I feel. A lot of people loved it though, so you know, I do think it's kind of like different strokes for different folks type thing. You could either really get with the vocals, or you could absolutely be turned off by them completely. And since then though, they quit, I think, kind of. I mean, they haven't, but they keep saying that they're not a band anymore, and yet they're dropping music anyway. So that's kind of not very clear, but I don't know if they're playing into a meme or something, saying that they're not a band anymore. Look, I don't think anyone really fully understands it. If you've been a fan of this band for years, I don't think you honestly understand what they're talking about when they say that. But the reason why I'm reviewing this is not to say that, once again, I am hating Black Dresses' album, but I've kind of done a bit of a 180 in the style of Blade, where I really did not like any of his output. But last year he dropped 2 projects, well, he dropped 3 projects actually, but 2 particular ones that I ended up really liking. Spoiler, I really like this new Black Dresses. Something about this one, which is again a bit of a blank sort of area in my mind because I haven't listened to the past few albums, but something about this one particularly feels really well crafted, really well put together. Vocally, I do think they've kind of polished their voices a little bit. They're not as erratic and as strange, even though at times it does sound twisted and bizarre, but I think it actually ends up working in their favor in a really, really clever way. When you read into the lyrics, a lot of what they say ends up kind of matching almost perfectly with how they're saying it, which I'm not saying is something that you never find in music, because obviously you do, but I think there's a way that Black Dresses do it in which has a really, really effective sort of end product where you actually get a feel for almost everything they say, and almost everything they say feels like it's coming from a place that I personally can't fully understand, but I think it ends up becoming easier to understand with how they say it, if that makes sense. Sorry if that's a bit waffly, but hopefully you get what I mean. And production-wise, I think this is a really, really stellar album. I mean, whether it's in these sort of harsher, industrial, noisy moments, or it's in the more sort of softer, cleaned up, really easily to digest moments. Not that those moments come very often, by the way. I don't want to completely missell this album, but I do think it ends up breaking the album down into chunks where you can sort of take a break from the and then you can kind of have those softer, calmer moments that just give you a bit of a break. You have a moment to recuperate. It's a good structure. Opening track might be one of the most nu metal songs that I think they've ever done, and I've even seen people say that this is their best song ever, and I can see why, because this is incredibly accessible in terms of, like, if you're just a general metal fan, like if you're a fan of like the newest stuff from Bring Me the Horizon, for example, which a lot of people are loving what Bring Me the Horizon are doing these days. I can't really see why you wouldn't like this. Not to say that they sound exactly the same, but I'm just saying that if you're a fan of one, I think you'd like the other. The instrumental sounds fantastic. It's produced so well. Like, the atmosphere that comes through is on par with something you'd expect from Deftones, and Deftones have been at this for years. It's a fantastic way to start, and ended up being, you know, multiple listens later, before I even started recording this review, it ended up being the best track for me easily. Not to say that everything else that comes after is bad or worse, but I think the bar is set so high that it was really hard to find a track that would meet this. Concrete Bubble has intensive screamo vocals. This could be where you could be completely put off by the album, but again, if you're a fan of generally, you know, screamo in general, you know, there's so many bands out there that get so much praise in the screamo world, I think you'd like this as well. The only difference is that they have very distinctive tones to their voices that I think could probably put people off. But I am actually warming up to the style that they come through with the really kind of twisted, strange approach that they have with their vocals. It's incredibly unique and really makes it make more sense as to why they've developed such a cult following, because you'd struggle to find vocals like this anywhere else. There are moments where the lyrics are really, really like overboard with how sadistic they feel, how sadomasochistic they even are at points, particularly on Heaven. Heaven might be one of the best examples of this. The parts where they say I'm nothing, which again might not have a huge amount of weight behind them if it weren't for the fact that the way they're saying it just adds this hellish feel to it, which I don't really have much to compare to, in the sense that they just have a way of giving you this awful sense of dread with everything they say. I love feeling pain. It makes me feel like I'm going to heaven. Man, what a strange way to word it, but goddamn, it's a chilling part of the track. Rage Quitted, I think, is pretty clever with the way that, you know, the title is Rage Quitted, and the main refrain is I don't want to do this anymore. I think that's a pretty clever way to sort of match the idea of rage quitting and your feeling of not wanting to do something anymore. Probably not the first person to make that link, I'm sure. I haven't watched any of the reviews or read any of the reviews, but I'm just here to say that that's a pretty clever part for me. The electronic inflections on the vocals don't really go down that well. They don't do this that frequently across the album, I don't think, but I think when it crops up on tracks like this, it probably could have just been taken away. Don't think it needs that manipulation to the voice. Perhaps again it could be something you really like, but I don't think it's something that sticks around long enough to make its mark. If they did it for the whole song, maybe it would make more sense, but I don't know, I just think it kind of feels a bit random. But then again, I think a lot of what they do isn't really there to make sense. I think they do it in an artistic way that is attempting to match the way they're saying things and stuff like that. So I get it in that sense, but just in terms of how it sounds, not really that big of a fan of it. We'll figure it out once again with the smashing drums, maybe the best track in terms of like the intensive drumming and the screams added in across the track. They're not constant. You know, I think they could have done it for the whole song, but they don't. And I think when it comes and goes, it just adds a really, really horrid feeling to the track, which I think is a really clever thing to do. Once again, I keep saying that about what they're doing, because I think if you just did the whole song screaming, it might end up getting a bit boring or a bit stale. But when they kind of add them in randomly and you're not entirely expecting them to pop up, I think that works better. In the least pretentious way I can say it, they're kind of like deconstructing metal elements and adding them in places that works, as opposed to just doing the whole thing from start to finish as like a metal album, if you get what I mean. And when they come and go like the way they do, I think it really gives this really awful horror feel to it, like I'm watching an intense horror film. Perfect Teeth is the perfect way I can segue from what I just said, because this track has the most blood-curdling screams. Oh my god. And honestly, this scares me more than any horror film I've seen in the past 10 years. Maybe Hereditary comes close, because that did mess me up a little bit. But horror in the 2010s, not been too good. I know someone in the comments is probably going to list out a bunch of films that I should see and I should give a chance, and that's fine. But I'm just saying, a lot of horror that I've seen hasn't been good. But somehow what music I'm finding like this is impacting me more than most horror films. It's like the most recent Clipping album too, that did a more effective job as well. Zero Ultra, definitely one of the most descriptive tracks, to the point where I wrote down some lyrics that I need to read out because they were incredibly effective in how they said it. Reflecting out through a rainbow prism color wheel in every direction of confused and poisonous lights. That gives off a really cool image in my mind, and I think a lot of people listening to this would have a great picture of what they're saying here. I think that's just such a cool way to word this kind of feeling or emotion. I need impossible gentleness, I think, is another great way of wording what they're saying. It's almost like saying that they need something that's impossible to find, and they're never going to achieve it, but they know it's something that they need. And again, the way they say it, I think, is incredibly vivid. The album closes off too. It ties up the themes of, confusion, identity, kind of falling apart at the seams at every given moment. I think this track just kind of sums it all up really well. I mean, the title says it all, doesn't it, really? Every given moment, they found that they're just falling apart, and they just don't know how to get out of the vicious cycle that they're in. They're struggling with identity, all those kinds of things that they've made very clear on this album through the way they're telling it and how they're telling it, I think has just made for a very impressive release. The final line of the album though, but it's not that bad. I think it kind of leaves things to be potentially improving, but it's not so unrealistic that they say everything can get better. They just leave it with, it's not that bad, which I think is a more realistic approach to take. It's pessimistic, obviously, it's completely pessimistic, but it doesn't become too like, oh, everything's gonna get better, we're all gonna be okay, yeah, let's hold hands, rainbows, unicorns, yeah. They're intelligent enough to know that things may not get better, and I think that's a clever way to end things off. I guess in terms of critiques, I have mentioned a few times, sometimes the vocals, try something slightly different, does get a bit confusing in places, almost too random, I think, at points, maybe. Bulldozer is a good example of that with the lyrics, like pussy like a bulldozer that they keep saying. I'm sure there's some kind of overarching theme to that I'm probably being a bit dismissive about, but I just think in terms of the track and how it sounds, it's just not really that impactful. It kind of just leaves me feeling a bit But a few moments across the album like that do happen too. I do think the penultimate track before Can't Keep It Together is almost too kind of like nondescript almost. But generally, I do think what they've given us here is really, really good. And I'm happy that I've become more accustomed to what they're doing and I'm enjoying something that they're giving us here. It's not perfect by any means. And you've got to remember, I'm coming from a place of not liking them to begin with, to now thinking that what they're doing here is really good. So of course I can't quite call it great just because of my own experiences with the band. I still think I'm warming up to them to an extent, and I'm not quite there yet, but I'm still at a 7 out of 10. And you know what? The score really shouldn't matter because everything I've said up until this point is more important than a numerical rating. But hopefully what you have done is enjoyed my review and understood where I'm coming from. And if you're a big fan of this band and what they're doing, please let me know in the comments your thoughts on this and any thoughts on what I've said in the review. Anything like that. Thank you. Do subscribe if you haven't already. That would be great. Have a good day and goodbye.